The atmosphere inside the cavernous hearing room of the Hart Senate office building was thick with the kind of sterile, highly manufactured tension that only Washington, D.C. can authentically produce during a globally televised spectacle. The massive, polished mahogany desks gleamed unforgivingly under the harsh, multi-directional studio lighting, and the industrial air conditioning system hummed a low, relentless, and vibrating drone in the background. It was a Tuesday morning that initially felt entirely routine, almost predictable to the seasoned political veterans, cynical journalists, and ambitious staffers occupying the room. Senator Adam Schiff, a highly decorated and immensely powerful figure within the Democratic establishment, had not spoken a single solitary word in 14 agonizingly long seconds. The official, solid gold United States Senate lapel pin, which was securely and proudly fastened to his custom-tailored $3,000 Midnight Navy suit jacket, had inexplicably tilted exactly 4 degrees off its perfect, meticulous vertical axis. His right hand, which had previously been casually resting on the polished oak table, was no longer adjusting the golden pin with the effortless, practiced grace of a seasoned politician. Instead, his hand was gripping the edge of the desk with the quiet, suffocating, and utter desperation of a drowning man desperately clutching a fragmented piece of driftwood, not because he genuinely believed the decaying wood would somehow save his life, but because physically letting go meant finally surrendering to the dark, bottomless abyss below him. Across the yawning partisan divide that physically, philosophically, and ideologically split the sprawling hearing chamber, a 73-year-old country lawyer hailing from the small, unassuming town of Madisonville, Louisiana, peered at him intently. Senator John Neely Kennedy looked over the top rim of his simple, wire-framed reading glasses. He did not shout to be heard. He did not aggressively posture for the banks of television cameras lining the back wall. Instead, he spoke with the quiet, devastating, and absolute authority of a man who knows, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he is holding an unbeatable, royal flush hand of cards. Senator, I'm going to ask you this specific question one final time, and then I am going to completely stop asking, because I firmly believe the 4 million American citizens currently watching this live television broadcast have already successfully deduced the correct answer, Kennedy stated. The heavy cream-colored document resting open directly in front of John Neely Kennedy was turned meticulously to page 7. That specific page proudly displayed a standard Fannie Mae refinancing affidavit, its date clearly and undeniably stamped as the 19th of April, 2011. The unmistakable, looping cursive signature of Adam Schiff rested comfortably and permanently on the bottom signature line. Schiff remained entirely silent, the air seemingly escaping his lungs in shallow, invisible breaths as the reality of the situation began to set in. To truly understand the sheer magnitude and historical significance of this exact moment, one must rewind exactly 53 minutes into the past, to the precise instant Adam Schiff made the most catastrophic, unforced error any seasoned, confident prosecutor could ever possibly make. He mistakenly and arrogantly believed he was still the one actively running the prosecution. He completely, utterly, and historically underestimated the meticulous, highly educated Bayou attorney sitting quietly across the expanse of the room from him. At that earlier point in the morning, Schiff was only 3 minutes into his meticulously rehearsed grand opening monologue. His Senate lapel pin was flawlessly and vertically aligned. His branded, expensive bottle of sparkling water remained completely unopened on the desk. He had confidently and casually reviewed the official witness list during his luxurious, first-class flight from Los Angeles the previous night, and absolutely no names on that printed roster had caused his heart rate to elevate even a fraction of a beat. He smiled patronizingly at the Louisiana senator and confidently projected his voice. I would gently remind my esteemed colleague that the solemn, constitutional duties of this distinguished committee do not in any way resemble the daily operations of running a local bait shop. We are actively deliberating matters of profound, historical, constitutional gravity. So I humbly ask the senator from Louisiana to remember he is currently sitting in the United States Senate. The Democratic members seated alongside him on the elevated wooden dais shared a collective, knowing and slightly mocking smile. A young, freshly graduated political staffer, sitting in the second row, discreetly offered an enthusiastic thumbs up to a colleague across the aisle. What Senator Schiff and his entire team were entirely oblivious to was the hidden reality that the country lawyer from Madisonville had spent the entire previous evening tucked away in a quiet, isolated, third-floor office of the Russell Senate office building, far removed from the glamorous cocktail parties and elite networking dinners of Capitol Hill. Kennedy, working tirelessly alongside two dedicated, exhausted staffers from the Senate Banking Committee, had intensely pored over three extensive, densely worded printed reports generated by the Federal Housing Finance Agency. They had finalized the exact sequence and highly damaging contents of a specific manila folder at exactly 17 minutes past 11 at night. Kennedy then took the folder back to his private residence, made a single, highly confidential phone call lasting precisely 6 minutes, and retired for the night with the quiet confidence of a hunter who had perfectly set his trap. That very folder now rested quietly on the lower bench directly in front of his microphone. Schiff, however, was not finished grandstanding for the morning news cycle. He leaned forward, adopting the posture of a weary, intellectually superior professor dealing with a particularly slow student, and added, "And while I naturally maintain respect for the senator's law degree from a fine state institution, I must remind him that not everyone in this chamber learned their constitutional law from a textbook printed prior to the Voting Rights Act." Schiff leaned back comfortably in his plush leather chair. In the wings of the hearing room, his highly paid communications director offered a slow, deliberate nod of deep approval, much like a veteran film director acknowledging a flawless, one-take performance. Across the aisle, Senator John Neely Kennedy offered absolutely no immediate verbal response. He did not take the obvious bait. Instead, he calmly, deliberately, and methodically removed his wire-rimmed glasses. He retrieved a small, crisp, perfectly white handkerchief from his suit's breast pocket, methodically polishing the right lens in slow circular motions, followed by the left lens. He then folded the cloth back into a neat, perfect square, returned it to his pocket, and gently replaced the glasses on his face. He picked up his standard issue, unbranded plastic water bottle, twisted off the plastic cap, took a modest, thoughtful sip, secured the cap once more, and placed the bottle exactly 2 inches to the left of its original spot on the desk. Then, and only then, he picked up the first manila folder. He opened it directly to page 4, securing it firmly to the desk with his left hand. 12 agonizingly silent seconds ticked by, hanging in the heavy air like a sharpened guillotine waiting to drop. Finally, breaking the suffocating tension, Kennedy adjusted his microphone. "Senator Schiff, I kindly and warmly thank you for that incredibly warm welcome," he began. The Louisiana drawl was thick, deeply resonant, and entirely disarming. It was not a performative, exaggerated accent put on for the television cameras. It was authentic, unadulterated Madisonville. He continued his thought, "You know, where I hail from, my father used to operate a modest little bait shop down by the banks of the Chifuncta River. We mostly sold worms to the local fishermen. Growing up in that environment, he used to frequently share a specific piece of wisdom with me. He said, 'Son, whenever a grown man spends the first 3 minutes of a conversation aggressively and loudly trying to convince you of how ignorant you are, he is usually on the verge of doing something spectacularly foolish himself.'" The drawl became slightly more pronounced, filling the silent, cavernous room. I always figured that was a fairly sound, logical piece of advice. The self-assured, arrogant smiles on the Democratic side of the aisle faded noticeably, quickly replaced by a sudden, creeping sense of unease. A senator seated 3 spots away from Schiff chuckled briefly, almost reflexively, before abruptly and nervously silencing himself. Kennedy kept his eyes firmly planted on the open manila folder in front of him. "Senator, I would like to direct a few specific financial inquiries your way regarding a residential property located in Potomac, Maryland." All remaining traces of smiles in the room instantly evaporated. Schiff's right hand instinctively and defensively moved toward his lapel pin for the very first time that morning. Page 4 of the document was a black and white photocopy, positioned at a slight, uneven angle, clearly indicating how the original, perhaps fragile document had been hastily placed on a scanning machine. At the very top of the page, printed in the standard, no-nonsense sans serif font that Fannie Mae has consistently utilized since the Reagan administration, read the clear, legally binding words, "Uniform Residential Loan Application Refinance. Kennedy elevated the piece of paper just enough for the highly advanced C-SPAN robotic camera to lock onto its contents. The technical producer sitting inside the dark broadcast truck parked outside the Hart Building softly whispered the command "Zoom" into his headset. Suddenly, the cursive signature at the bottom of page 4 completely filled 12 million television screens across the United States of America. The signature clearly, undeniably read Adam B. Schiff. Kennedy looked up and asked, "That is your personal signature right there, is it not, Senator?" The polished, highly media-trained veneer in Schiff's voice was still technically present at this early juncture. "Senator Kennedy, that specific document is being grossly and intentionally mischaracterized. The FHFA referral you are referencing is merely a component of a politically motivated, partisan operation designed to distract." Kennedy interrupted with a tone so incredibly gentle and folksy, it sounded like a friendly neighbor offering to help carry heavy groceries up a steep driveway. "I did not inquire about the nature of the FHFA referral, Senator. I simply asked a very basic question about the signature. Is that your handwriting or is it not?" Schiff, desperately and quickly, glanced toward the wings of the room at his communications director, Sarah Lynn. Her impressive professional portfolio boasted a senior vice president title at a prestigious, highly expensive Beltway strategic communications firm. She was already aggressively and frantically typing on her smartphone, resolutely refusing to make direct eye contact with her boss. That was the very initial warning sign that the situation was deteriorating. Schiff deflected the direct question. "Senator, the document speaks for itself." In a traditional, formal courtroom setting, such a response is legally known as baiting for an objection. In a highly publicized Senate hearing broadcast to millions of voters, it takes on an entirely different, highly damaging meaning. A veteran journalist seated in the second row, working for a prominent left-leaning publication that had fiercely and consistently defended Schiff for over half a decade, slowly scribbled a solitary, damning sentence into his notepad. It simply read, "He did not deny the signature." Kennedy did not need to press the signature issue any further. "Yes, sir, it certainly does speak for itself," Kennedy noted, as he calmly lowered the page and turned to a fresh, newly revealed document. And what it explicitly and legally states is that on the 19th of April 2011, you formally swore under the severe penalty of federal perjury that a house situated in Maryland served as your primary residence. Kennedy then smoothly produced a second photocopy from the folder. This particular sheet prominently featured the official, ornate seal of Los Angeles County at its header. Now, this document right here is a Los Angeles County Assessor's Homeowner's Exemption Form. It is from the exact same year, 2011, applying to a condominium located in Burbank, California. This specific, binding form mandates that the applicant legally certify the listed property as their sole primary residence within the state of California. You signed this document as well, Senator. Kennedy paused for a single, heavy, dramatic beat. The 28th of April 2011. He paused again, letting the dates hang in the air, exactly 9 days after you signed the Maryland affidavit. The typically noisy press gallery had gone completely, unnervingly motionless. Two separate reporters simultaneously jotted down the number 9 in their notebooks. Over in the wings, Sarah Lynn had abruptly ceased her frantic texting. She held her expensive phone down at her side, the glowing screen facing the floor, adopting the defeated posture of someone who suddenly realized their intended messaging strategy was entirely irrelevant to the massive disaster unfolding before them. Kennedy's voice easily cut through the heavy, oppressive silence. Back in Madisonville, Senator, when a gentleman tells two separate financial institutions the exact same story on 2 different days, we call that being reliable and consistent. But telling 2 different banks 2 completely contradictory things within the exact same month, well, that is an entirely different matter altogether. Kennedy let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the devastating legal blow. Under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1014, that is legally defined as making a false statement to a financial institution, which carries a severe penalty of up to 30 years in a federal prison, a quiet, nervous murmur rippled through the packed press section. It was the distinct, recognizable sound that seasoned journalists make when they suddenly realize the central, pre-written narrative of their upcoming article has fundamentally and irreversibly changed right before their very eyes. Kennedy laid out 3 additional photocopies onto his desk in rapid practice succession. I have 5 of these exact documents right here, Senator, from 2009, 2011, 2012, and 2013, in addition to the original purchase application dating back to 2003. It is the identical property, featuring the identical legal certification and bearing the identical signature across 5 separate, legally binding Fannie Mae loans. He calmly closed the folder. Senator, the Financial Crimes Division of Fannie Mae utilized the specific, highly concerning phrase, a sustained pattern of possible occupancy misrepresentation. The acting director of the FHFA subsequently sent a formal criminal referral directly to the Attorney General of the United States, explicitly citing 4 separate federal statutes: wire fraud, mail fraud, bankfraud, and making false statements to a financial institution. This was the exact terrifying moment Adam Schiff frantically began running the complex legal calculations in his mind. The strict statute of limitations for Section 1014 violations was traditionally 10 years. Because the current year was beyond that specific threshold, he had previously believed his criminal exposure was permanently, legally time-barred. What he had tragically and completely failed to calculate was the devastating political reality that a formal criminal referral does not require an actual criminal conviction to entirely obliterate a political career. It merely needs to be read aloud, point by agonizing point, on live television by a methodical country lawyer. Kennedy continued his onslaught, carefully outlining the massive financial windfall. By falsely claiming a primary residence in Maryland, Schiff secured a significantly lower interest rate, saving an estimated $40,000 to $60,000 over the life of the loans. By simultaneously claiming the California tax exemption, he saved approximately $70,000 in state property taxes. We are conservatively looking at a figure well north of $100,000 in total financial benefit, flowing directly into the pockets of a sitting member of Congress, Kennedy stated with icy precision. Schiff finally found his voice, desperately grasping for a viable defense. Senator Kennedy, my respective addresses in California and Maryland have both been listed as primary residences for loan processing purposes simply because they are both fully occupied by me throughout the entire calendar year. Kennedy raised a single, commanding index finger. Senator, with all due respect to you, that statement is not a legal defense. That is a carefully crafted public relations press release. The Federal Mortgage Code does not casually state that a primary residence is simply wherever you happen to lay your head. The code explicitly and purposely uses the word primary. That is a singular noun. It inherently means one. It means uno. A person cannot legally possess a primary home and then turn around and claim yet another primary home. That completely defies logic. That is precisely like claiming you have a wife and then declaring you also have another wife. The manila folder was then casually pushed aside, its devastating work complete. In its place, a vibrant, imposing red folder materialized on Kennedy's desk. Kennedy stated, "But Senator, I did not travel all the way up here from Louisiana merely to discuss the creative financing of a house in Maryland. I came up here today to discuss something you explicitly claimed you witnessed with your own 2 eyes." When the red folder was opened, it emitted the faint, distinct, and authoritative scent of aged leather. Senator, on the date of the 26th of September 2019, you were serving as the powerful, highly visible chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. During a highly publicized hearing, you clearly stated to the world, "I have the call right here." You then proceeded to read aloud what you presented as the official, verbatim contents of a highly classified call between the President of the United States and the President of Ukraine. Schiff hesitated, his famous polished demeanor cracking. Senator Kennedy, my opening statement delivered on that specific day was widely characterized at the time as a parody. Kennedy interrupted, his Louisiana drawl tightening perceptibly. At the time, Senator, or do you actually mean it was characterized as a parody only after you were caught red-handed? A faint, undeniable, and highly visible flush of red began to creep up Schiff's neck. The sophisticated C-SPAN camera flawlessly and unforgivingly captured a single, heavy bead of perspiration, forming and breaking loose along the side of Schiff's neck. Kennedy relentlessly read Schiff's fabricated words back to him. "I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent." Kennedy's voice dropped to an icy, furious whisper. You deliberately read those completely fabricated words into the official congressional record, Senator. You did so on national television. Are you aware of the exact date when the actual, verified transcript of that specific phone call was officially declassified and released to the public by the White House? September 25, 2019. Exactly 1 day prior to you reading your fabricated version into the official record. This means you physically possess the real transcript, Senator. It was sitting right there on your desk, and you made the conscious, deliberate, and highly unethical decision to read a completely different, highly damaging version out loud on purpose. Kennedy then brought the heavy constitutional hammer down regarding the consequences of those actions. On the 21st of June 2023, the United States House of Representatives, via a recorded official vote of 213 to 209, formally and officially censured you. The disciplinary resolution explicitly stated Representative Schiff purposely deceived his committee, Congress, and the American people. You hold the rare, dubious distinction of being the 25th lawmaker in the entire history of the American Republic to face such a severe censure. Schiff abruptly stood up, his voice rising dramatically in pitch and volume. He loudly labeled the censure a partisan political act and pure political theater, desperately attempting to pivot back to his standard, well-worn talking points against Donald Trump. The progressive wing of the press gallery, desperate for a lifeline, erupted in a brief, frantic wave of applause. Kennedy did not attempt to interrupt the applause. He simply sat there, waiting patiently for the theatrics to end. When the room finally, inevitably quieted down, Kennedy spoke. The folksy, meandering drawl was entirely gone. The voice that now projected through the microphone was the razor-sharp, highly educated, and immensely intimidating voice of John Neely Kennedy, Juris Doctor, University of Virginia School of Law, magna cum laude, holding a prestigious postgraduate diploma from Oxford University. Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2 of the United States Constitution explicitly grants each respective chamber of Congress the undeniable absolute authority to punish its own members for disorderly behavior, Kennedy stated with chilling, academic precision. The formal censure of a sitting representative is not political theater. It is the highest form of constitutional discipline. The document explicitly utilizes the word purposely deceived. That is not a whimsical literary device, Senator. That is a formal, permanent legal finding. The applause in the room was completely, instantly dead. The progressive cheerleaders slumped back into their seats, defeated by the weight of constitutional law. Kennedy then pulled a thick, navy blue folder to the center of the desk. Senator, do you happen to recall a gentleman by the name of Mr. Michael Atkinson, the Inspector General of the intelligence community? Kennedy systematically outlined the timeline. Atkinson received a whistleblower complaint on the 12th of August, 2019. Kennedy asked if the whistleblower had prior, undisclosed contact with Schiff's committee staff before filing the official complaint. Schiff weakly defended the contact as routine procedure. Kennedy pounced with the precision of a hawk. Routine, Senator? Was it standard, routine protocol that exactly 2 weeks before that monumental complaint was filed, your committee mysteriously hired a fellow named Sean Misko? Misko was a former National Security Council aide who worked directly alongside the very same individual who later filed the explosive whistleblower complaint. You specifically hired Mr. Misko exactly 1 day after the infamous Trump-Zelensky phone call took place. Now, that is quite the miraculous coincidence, is it not, Senator? Kennedy then forcefully reminded the silent room that on the 17th of September 2019, Schiff went on national television and explicitly, brazenly denied having direct contact with the whistleblower, a claim the New York Times later definitively proved was false. Schiff's hand, still clutching his lapel pin, was visibly trembling. The very whistleblower complaint that single-handedly triggered the historic impeachment of a sitting president of the United States was entirely based on unverified hearsay, Kennedy declared. The so-called whistleblower was not even on the actual phone call. He had merely read a second-hand summary. Exactly 16 out of the 18 impeachment witnesses your committee proudly paraded in front of the cameras provided absolutely nothing but hearsay testimony. Kennedy's tone dropped to a solemn, unrelenting, and devastating baseline. Senator, allow me to explicitly state what I know you desperately hope I will not say out loud. I firmly believe you lied. I believe you intentionally lied when you read a completely fabricated transcript into the congressional record. You lied to the hardworking taxpayers who funded a $32 million investigation. For years, finally, signaling the end of the onslaught, Kennedy pulled forward a sleek, ominous black folder. On the 20th of March 2017, you delivered an opening statement deliberately reading highly specific, highly damaging allegations from the completely unverified Steele dossier into the congressional record. You forcefully presented unverified claims as absolute evidence. Did you ever produce that actual evidence? Schiff stuttered badly, the polished orator who had flawlessly captivated millions of viewers on primetime cable television, suddenly vanishing, entirely replaced by a cornered, panicked politician frantically searching the room for a non-existent lifeline. He desperately attempted to bring up the sprawling Mueller investigation, raising his hands in a defensive, pleading posture, attempting to use the former special counsel's name as a bureaucratic shield against the incoming, devastating barrage of facts. The Mueller investigation clearly demonstrated, he began, his voice cracking noticeably on the second syllable, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the harsh studio lighting. Mueller uncovered absolute zero evidence of any criminal conspiracy, Kennedy whispered, cutting him off with surgical precision. That singular whisper was vastly more devastating than any theatrical shout could have ever been. It sliced through Schiff's desperate stammering like a freshly sharpened blade severing a nerve. The Louisiana senator did not need to raise his voice. He simply lowered its emotional temperature to an absolute, freezing zero. Without breaking eye contact, Kennedy meticulously cited Inspector General Michael Horowitz's exhaustive, agonizingly detailed report. He reminded the hushed chamber of the 17 documented, catastrophic procedural failures, intentional omissions, and outright FBI fabrications regarding the FISA applications used to unlawfully surveil American citizens. Kennedy then methodically and ruthlessly pivoted to Special Counsel John Durham's final, conclusive report, driving the ultimate nail into the partisan narrative's coffin by stating clearly that the Department of Justice possessed absolutely zero legitimate legal basis for launching the massive Crossfire hurricane investigation in the first place. Mr. Chairman, Kennedy announced, his resonant drawl echoing off the cold marble walls of the hearing room. He deliberately and dramatically turned his gaze completely away from Schiff, a dismissive gesture indicating that the man sitting across from him was no longer worthy of his direct attention. I would like to formally invite 3 specific observers to address this committee. In the second row of the public gallery, a space normally reserved for eager congressional interns and bored tourists, 3 men slowly stood up in synchronized unison. The massive, high-definition array of C-SPAN broadcast cameras, instantly sensing the sudden, unexpected shift in movement, pivoted on their automated gimbals to capture them. The faint, mechanical whirring of the camera motors was the only sound audible in the profoundly silent, paralyzed room. The first man stepped slightly forward and spoke with the quiet, unshakable, and profound dignity of someone who had survived a long, dark nightmare. "My name is Carter Page," he began, his voice steady, resolute, and completely devoid of malice. "I am an honorable military veteran who proudly served in the United States Navy. I hold a PhD. I dedicated my entire adult life to understanding complex international relations. Yet, I became the primary target of an incredibly invasive, completely unconstitutional FISA warrant. That secret warrant, which allowed the federal government to monitor my every private communication, was based entirely on a fabricated, politically funded document that Senator Schiff knew perfectly well was completely unverified. Despite knowing the absolute truth, Senator Schiff deliberately, repeatedly, and maliciously read those toxic, life-ruining lies about me directly into the permanent congressional record. I simply want the United States Senate to remember that after all the smears, I am still standing here. Before the heavy emotional weight of Page's words could fully settle over the room, the second man rose to his feet. "My name is Devin Nunes," he stated, his tone heavily laced with the weary, righteous frustration of a man who had been proven completely right, far too late. In early 2018, I released a detailed memorandum desperately warning the American public that the sacred FISA process had been severely and intentionally abused for partisan political purposes. In response, Senator Schiff went on every major television network and publicly stated my memo was a dangerous conspiracy theory, completely unsupported by the facts. 22 grueling months later, the Inspector General published his findings and confirmed every single material claim in my memo was absolutely true. Finally, the third man stood. The camera zoomed in closely on his face. My name is George Papadopoulos. I was unfairly pressured, threatened with absolute financial ruin, and crushed by the immense weight of the federal government into pleading guilty to making a false statement. I served 12 agonizing, terrifying days locked inside a federal prison cell. The original predicate for launching that massive investigation into my life was the exact same fabricated, unverified political dossier that Senator Schiff enthusiastically promoted to the world on a daily basis. Senator Schiff has never spent a single day behind bars. The sprawling Senate chamber was entirely frozen in a state of profound, suffocating shock. The abstract political gamesmanship and the sterile legal jargon had suddenly been stripped away. The devastating, irreversible human cost of the political theater had suddenly, brutally been laid bare for the entire world to witness. You weaponized your top-secret security clearance to intentionally promote a piece of garbage opposition research, read a fake transcript, and filed completely false primary residence certifications, Kennedy stated, his eyes locked back onto Schiff with the predatory, unblinking intensity of a hawk. What does not wash off, Senator, is what you deliberately did to these three honorable men. That is three completely destroyed families, sacrificed entirely for your personal political ambition. At that exact moment, Schiff's trembling right hand finally surrendered its desperate, white-knuckled grip. His solid gold United States Senate lapel pin, the ultimate, gleaming symbol of his power, prestige, and perceived untouchability, finally gave way. It tumbled off his lapel, falling through the air in agonizing slow motion before landing silently on the plush carpeted floor. It lay there, completely discarded and forgotten. Kennedy leaned forward, resting heavily on the desk. Senator, 3 final yes or no questions, Kennedy demanded, his voice ringing with absolute, inescapable finality. 1. Did you knowingly sign a Fannie Mae affidavit officially certifying a Maryland property as your primary residence, while simultaneously claiming a lucrative California tax exemption for another property? 2. Did you deliberately and purposely read a distorted, completely fabricated version of the Trump-Zelensky phone call into the congressional record? 3. Were you purposefully and intentionally deceiving the American people regarding a classified phone call, a sprawling Russia investigation, and a thoroughly debunked political dossier? 14. Singular, agonizing, completely paralyzing seconds ticked by in the cavernous expanse of the Hart Senate office building. In the sterile universe of modern television, where sound bites are frantically engineered to fill every conceivable millisecond of dead air, 14 seconds of absolute unbroken silence is not merely a pause, it is an absolute eternity. It is the suffocating vacuum of deep space. You could hear the faint, high-pitched whine of the massive broadcast cameras meticulously recalibrating their autofocus lenses. You could hear the rhythmic, nervous tapping of a terrified staffer's pen against a mahogany desk 3 rows back. You could practically hear the synchronized, terrified beating of the hearts belonging to the political strategists watching the live feed from the safety of their heavily fortified offices across the city. Adam Schiff's mouth opened, forming the shape of a word that stubbornly refused to materialize. He closed it. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing painfully against the starched, suffocating confines of his crisp collar. When he finally managed to force air past his paralyzed vocal cords, the resulting sound was entirely stripped of the booming, theatrical baritone that had triumphantly dominated cable news networks for the better part of a decade. The phrasing is fundamentally flawed, Schiff weakly replied. His voice was barely a whisper, a fragile, trembling ghost of a defense that shattered into a million microscopic pieces the very instant it hit the unforgiving microphones. It was not a robust legal rebuttal. It was not a defiant, righteous stand for justice. It was the pitiful surrender of a man who had suddenly, terribly realized that the complex, impenetrable fortress of falsehoods he had spent years meticulously constructing had just been demolished by a simple country lawyer armed with nothing but basic arithmetic and undeniable paper receipts. Across the yawning partisan divide, Senator John Neely Kennedy did not gloat. He did not smile, smirk, or dramatically play to the gallery of hungry journalists. He simply looked at Schiff with a mixture of profound exhaustion and quiet, unshakable pity. With a subtle, almost imperceptible wave of his hand, a gesture that commanded more sheer power than 100 hours of screaming political rhetoric, Kennedy immediately yielded the remainder of his allotted time. Schiff did not linger. He did not attempt to reorganize his scattered notes. He rapidly, clumsily, pushed himself away from the heavy oak desk, his expensive leather chair scraping loudly, violently against the carpet. He practically fled, exiting the chamber with his head lowered. As he walked out, he was completely enveloped and surrounded by the deafening, oppressive silence of a permanently broken narrative. There were no progressive cheers to carry him out. There was only the cold, harsh, unforgiving glare of reality. The political aftermath did not wait for the evening news cycle to begin. It crashed ashore immediately, a massive, unstoppable digital tsunami that obliterated everything in its path. Across global social media platforms, algorithms desperately struggled to keep pace with the sheer volume of traffic. Within 20 minutes, the hashtag number #PossumBitBack proudly occupied the #1 trending spot worldwide. It was a digital wildfire. Memes, video clips, and legal analyses flooded the internet. Meanwhile, deep within the bureaucratic labyrinth of Capitol Hill, the gears of actual, terrifying consequence began to turn. Before the afternoon sun had even begun to set over the Washington Monument, the notoriously slow and methodical Senate Ethics Committee formally, publicly announced it would launch a formal, unsparing, and comprehensive legal review into the glaring inconsistencies of Schiff's dual residency certifications. While Washington descended into absolute, unprecedented chaos, Senator John Neely Kennedy wanted absolutely no part of the surrounding media circus. His phone buzzed relentlessly with desperate requests for exclusive, primetime cable news interviews from every major broadcast network. He ignored every single one of them. He quietly packed his worn leather briefcase, slipped out of a discreet side exit, and headed straight for the airport. He boarded a flight and flew back to the muggy, embraceable warmth of Louisiana. The profound transition from the sterile, artificial, and hyper-calculated environment of Washington, D.C. into the thick, breathing, and living air of the deep American South was nothing short of a profound physical relief for Senator John Neely Kennedy, who flew back to Louisiana declining all media interviews. Leaving behind the polished marble corridors, the endless political theater, and the suffocating tension of the Senate floor, he drove his own well-worn truck, expertly navigating the familiar, winding local roads of his home state. As the evening shadows began to stretch long and dark across the vibrant, lush green landscape of the bayou, the heavy burdens of the day started to lift. He finally pulled his dusty vehicle into the familiar crushed gravel parking lot of Bogart's Bait and Tackle. The heavy treaded tires crunched loudly and satisfyingly against the stone, a grounding, physical sound that officially announced his highly anticipated arrival back to reality. Stepping inside the dim establishment, the local bait shop smelled exactly as it always had for decades, a deeply comforting, authentic, and nostalgic mixture of aged, sun-baked wood, damp river mud, live bait wriggling in the coolers, and the faint, unmistakable tang of outboard motor gasoline. Beauregard, the deeply weathered, gray-bearded owner who had known Kennedy personally since he was just a young boy casting his very first line, was standing patiently behind the heavily worn, scarred wooden counter. He slowly, deliberately wiped his calloused, working hands on a stained, faded cotton towel. Without uttering a single, unnecessary word of greeting to break the comfortable silence, Beauregard reached deep into the battered, humming commercial refrigerator. He retrieved a tall, heavy frosted glass and filled it completely to the very brim. He silently handed Kennedy the freezing cold glass of legendary Southern sweet tea. The condensation instantly beat it up, rapidly running down the smooth, chilled sides of the glass. Beauregard leaned his considerable weight heavily against the creaking wooden counter. An old, dust-covered AM radio sat on a nearby shelf, softly buzzing with static. He had obviously been listening intently to the live, explosive Senate hearing broadcast all afternoon. Looking at the senator with knowing eyes, Beauregard finally broke the silence. "Did he explain away that second house?" he asked, his voice rough as gravel. Kennedy took a slow, incredibly thoughtful sip of the freezing, sugary liquid, letting the chilling relief wash over him. "No, sir," he replied softly, his authentic Madisonville drawl returning to its natural, relaxed cadence. Beauregard nodded slowly, turning his weathered gaze to look out the patched screen door toward the slow-moving, muddy currents of the river. "Your daddy always said a smart possum will patiently allow a foolish man to completely underestimate him for exactly as long as it takes that foolish man to underestimate himself," Beauregard stated, reciting the old local wisdom. Kennedy took another long, deeply refreshing drink, the melting ice cubes clinking softly and rhythmically against the sides of the glass. The exhausting, high-stakes battle was finally over. The absolute truth had finally been placed strictly on the permanent record, neatly and systematically organized inside 4 simple manila folders. Smash that like button if you firmly believe a solid paper trail defeats a slick press release, and share this story to spread the absolute truth.